these labor shortages got worse, ultimately making labor shortages a serious issue, as we all know. Perfect. So a little bit of how we got our lost sales estimate. As I mentioned before, we've estimated that the industry has lost about 3.5 billion in lost sales. So based on the survey, we found that 21% of employers surveyed lost sales due to having vacancies. And then of these 21% of employers, among them, we found that they lost about 18% of sales. We calculated that percentage based on the lost sales that each employer reported. So every employer, if they selected that they lost sales, they were able to then select how much they lost, 1 to 5%, 10 to 15% in those brackets. And then they also reported what their revenue was for the year. So by multiplying their lost sales by their revenue, that's how we got this 17.5%. When we multiply the 21% times the 17.5%, that gives us the total lost sales for the entire survey sample. So we estimate that our survey sample lost about 3.9% of sales. Then we extrapolate that up to the entire agriculture industry. The entire agriculture industry produced about 95 billion in sales in 2022. So when we multiply that by 3.9%, we get our 3.5 billion in lost sales. This is dollars that was left on the table that the agriculture sector could have brought in if they had had all the workers they needed. Again, this is not a small number. And again, this number has grown since previous research, partially just due to the growth in the agriculture sector. All right, so we kind of touched on, the labor market indicators. Based on the statistics we just went through, obviously employers are having a difficult time finding workers, and these labor shortages are having very negative impacts in terms of lost sales, but also, stress on workers. So now we're going to dig a bit deeper into why employers are having such a hard time finding workers or recruiting workers. Ultimately, the first thing that's making recruitment difficult is employers receive few applicants. For our total sample, about 33% of employers received no domestic applicants. This is even higher. You can see almost 40% in crops and almost 40% in animals as well. So that's 2 in 5 employers received 0 applicants. This is higher than it was in 2018. In 2018, we saw about 30% of employers in crop and about 30% of employers in animal received 0 applicants. So employers are receiving fewer applicants. Ultimately, if they receive few applicants to begin with, the recruitment process is very difficult. We asked employers where they are advertising. The most popular recruitment technique is still word of mouth, not surprising, but also employers, about 50% reported using online job boards, 40% social media, 30% use local employment centers, and 25% said their own website. So employers are trying a variety of recruitment methods. Word of mouth continues to be the most effective method, according to our survey. 41% of employers said it was the most effective method. There's definitely pros to using word of mouth. You're able to maybe better vet candidates because maybe you have a personal connection with them. So it's a bit more efficient that way. However, relying on word of mouth does limit the reach of, who you were able to advertise to in terms of recruitment. However, we did hear from employers and stakeholders during the interviews and the focus group process that many of these online job postings will often yield many like illegitimate applicants or spam applicants. So it tends to be a lot of work for employers to then sift through all of these spam applications. So sometimes it feels like using online tools ends up being more work than it's worth. This lends itself to, there needs to be further discussion about how we can improve these numbers. We ultimately need employers to get more applicants in order for them to improve their recruitment process. There's no best recruitment method. There's pros and cons to each one. So there needs to be further discussion about how we can improve these recruitment methods. So what makes recruitment difficult? We asked employers, what are the top 5 factors making recruitment of workers at your operation more difficult? Not surprising, the first number of results here are inherent things in agriculture: the manual labor, low pay, the seasonal nature of the work, and the rural location. Many of these things are intrinsic to the agriculture sector. There is manual labor involved, the seasonal nature, and the rural location. These are things that can't be changed. However, interesting, some of the other ones that were mentioned in terms of applicants lack experience, young people have little exposure, lack of understanding. These are things that maybe can be changed and provide opportunity to improve the recruitment process. As well as in terms of compensation or low pay in agriculture, there's lots of discussion about this during the focus groups and the interviews. And we heard from many stakeholders that there's a need to really advertise what the value proposition of working in agriculture is. Need to advertise, the other non-monetary benefits that workers can get from working in the sector. I will talk a little bit more about the lack of awareness piece as well, a little bit further on. Ultimately, I think the takeaway from this graph is how can we acknowledge what's inherent in the agriculture sector. What makes agriculture unique is, some of its seasonality, its rural location, being outdoors, the manual labor. And how can we focus on the aspects that can be changed in terms of lack of experience or lack of exposure or lack of understanding. We asked workers what were the top 5 factors that limited their work in agriculture. Again, this is a survey of workers who are currently employed in agriculture. If we were employing or if we were surveying workers who had left jobs in agriculture, the results might be slightly different. They might have different reasons for why they left. So just keep that in mind that this is workers who currently work in the industry. So top factors that limit their interest is pay compared to other sectors. This is not surprising. It's very top of mind for workers and employers in our, high inflation environment that we find ourselves in, as well as given how tight labor markets are across different industries, employers are facing stiff competition from other sectors, and employers are able to, look at other jobs in other industries, and, basically jump ship if they can find higher wages somewhere else. We heard from interviews that some employers would report that their workers would leave for getting $1 or $2 more. Because it's so competitive out there, other employers are able to offer that, especially in other industries like oil and gas or construction. Another interesting one to note is the limited career paths. Over 30% of workers reported limited career paths as a factor that's limiting their interest in agriculture. Sometimes career paths in agriculture are not well defined or well understood, and this can be something that employers can improve in terms of their management practices or their HR practices, is being able to provide workers with maybe a clearer understanding of what their career path could be or could look like. And that has potential to improve recruitment and retention. Given this is kind of the negative side about why workers are less interested in agriculture, but I did want to point out that based on our survey of workers, um, workers were generally very happy working in agriculture. We found that 66% of workers were likely or highly likely to recommend working in agriculture. We also found that 71% of of workers said that they like working in the sector. So although these things limit their interest, um, among the workers that we did survey, they are generally happy and satisfied with working in agriculture. All right, so into retention. There's lots of overlap between retention and recruitment, and often factors that make recruitment difficult will also make retention difficult. All right, turnover rate. Now, this was the least popular rate that you guys selected, but I actually think it's one of the most interesting or one of the most telling. So right now for agriculture, based on the employer survey, we found turnover to be around 14%, which is very high. In 2018, we had turnover around 10%, which was still high, but it's gone up considerably since then. Based on other work done by the conference board, turnover for all of Canada across all industries is around 8%. So agriculture is a fair bit higher than the 8% average, being around 14%. And as you're probably all aware, this high turnover has important implications for the industry. The big thing that stands out to me is how turnover really can hurt productivity. Every time you have a worker leave, you need to spend the time and energy to find a worker, which, as we discussed, is difficult in and of itself. But then you have to also spend the time to train them and get them up to speed. And it takes a while for a new worker to actually reach the level of productivity that the worker who left had. This is not agriculture related, but just interesting. In a recent HR report by the conference board, they estimated that it takes about 8 months for a new worker to reach the level of productivity of an existing worker. Again, that's just across all industries. But as you can imagine, for any industry, it takes time for a new worker to become as productive. So having high turnover like this will limit productivity within the sector. Interesting, turnover is not always related to wages as well. As we can see, based on our survey, poultry and egg had the highest turnover, even though they have some of the higher wages within agriculture. Also, just because a industry had high vacancy rates, that didn't necessarily mean they had high turnover. For example, poultry and egg had lower vacancy rates, but they still have high turnover, which is a problem in their industry. Other industries like tree, fruit, and vine have high vacancies, but a slightly lower, still high, but slightly lower turnover. So this was an interesting graph, I thought, when I put it together. It's about comparing employer and worker perspectives. The factors, we asked employers what factors make retaining workers difficult, and we asked workers what factors limit their interest in agriculture. If you remember, I showed the graph that had just the worker component of this. So now I'm comparing this to the employer side. Interesting, the employers are much more likely to select the physical nature of the work, the working hours, outdoor work. As you can see, the green bar is higher for those ones. Whereas workers are more likely to select the low benefits, the limited career paths as factors limiting their interest. Again, I want to reiterate that these are workers currently employed. We'd probably get slightly different results if we were surveying workers that had left the agriculture sector. But it does help highlight that workers are very concerned with their benefits and their pay, as well as their career advancements opportunities. So addressing these two things can help improve retention or lower that high turnover rate that we just talked about. All right, so on to kind of my last section is about HR tools and strategies. We actually found that 29% of workers choose to leave agriculture because of poor management practices. On the contrary, we found that 34% of workers stay in agriculture because of good management practices. All this to say is that management practices play a very big role in a worker deciding to stay or leave an industry. We asked employers which of the following HR management activities are they using? Most of these relate to kind of a skills or a knowledge transfer, both the mentoring, job shadowing, job swapping, job rotation, training workers. All of these are about transferring skills from generally more experienced workers to newer workers. This isn't a surprising result, especially when we get into our retirement forecast. Um, Spoil the thing, but we are expecting a large number of retirements over the next coming years. And as a result, employers need to be training new workers, offering mentorship, job shadowing, these kind of things in order to ensure that workers have the skills that they need. Another interesting thing from this graph is 17% of employers said none, that they weren't using any management activities. We had an other category as well, so they could have selected that, but they chose none. This is a rather large share, 17%. It might indicate that some employers maybe aren't thinking about which HR strategies to use. Maybe they use some of these things, they don't really formalize it, or maybe they need to be thinking more about how to improve their HR management practices. However, it's not easy for employers to, have the time to invest in HR training and resources and improving management practices. The lack of time is the number one reason why managers aren't able to invest in HR training. That was selected by over 42 or by, 42% of employers. It creates kind of a vicious cycle of it makes sense that employers, have a lack of time, especially given the vacancy rates and the turnover that they're experiencing. It's hard to find the time to invest in other HR training or resources. However, based on what we heard in surveys and interviews, as well as those statistics I shared from the workers, management practices do play a large role in whether workers are planning to stay or leave. Interesting, 28% of employers said they didn't know. They didn't know which barriers exist. This might suggest a general kind of lack of understanding or lack of knowledge about where to find tools or what tools they need. Other things that can be addressed are cost. There is generally a cost associated with HR training, and that can be a barrier for employers. Also, employers reported not knowing where to find resources or not knowing how to use the resources. We heard in some focus groups that the resources maybe weren't tailored enough to their needs on their farm. We asked employers, have you or your staff taken any training in HR over the past year? Overall, about 30% of employers in agriculture had taken some HR training. As you can see, this quite varies by industry. Aquaculture at the highest there, at almost 70%, and poultry and egg at the lowest. So these are numbers that, the industry could work on improving. It'd be interesting, in 5 years and from now, if this type of research is repeated as well, to see if there's been gains in terms of the share of employers or operations that are taking HR management training. It's also kind of interesting to note as well, aquaculture here has one of the highest share of staff taking HR training. They also had the lowest turnover rate. Again, this isn't a direct correlation because it doesn't match for all of these industries, but for aquaculture, it does, as well as poultry and egg has the lowest share of staff taking HR training, but it had the highest turnover rate. So just some interesting things that came out of the data here. All right, so kind of to summarize everything I've said, as well as summarizing, findings from the focus group and the interviews. It was very clear during interviews and focus groups that foreign workers are a solution, a long-term solution for many industries, especially those with more seasonality that really needs a large number of workers for a short season of time. However, we heard that temporary foreign workers are more susceptible to policy change, regulations, market conditions, high housing costs. If we have global events like a pandemic, we all saw that really inhibits an employer's ability to get temporary foreign workers. All that to say is that temporary foreign workers are essential to the industry, and we'll see that more as we go through the forecast results as well. We heard from employers and stakeholders that despite offering competitive wages, they need other factors to attract workers, things such as good company culture and career growth possibilities were things that employers mentioned being successful at retaining workers by having. Again, given how tight labor markets are across industries, employers have to be thinking about these things, about how do I keep my workers engaged? How do I offer them, career growth in order for them to stay? We heard from stakeholders that there's continued need for promoting careers in agriculture. This also goes back to what employers selected as a challenge for recruiting. They often said a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding, a lack of experience are barriers to recruitment. So promoting careers in agriculture at all levels of education can help improve that by increasing exposure and increasing understanding about careers in agriculture. We also heard that there's a high value on apprenticeships and formalized trades and how this is a good way to get skilled workers in the sector. Ultimately, we heard from employers that the use of automation and technology are going to be used as much as possible in the future. However, sorry, they're not going to eliminate the demand for workers. They will kind of shift what type of skills are needed. Specifically, we heard there'll be more demand for workers with kind of diverse skills that are able to operate some machinery and technology, but also do manual labor as well. So there's interesting implications for what automation and technology will do in terms of skills in the future. All right, well, thank you for listening to me for the last number of minutes. Now we'll go over to some Q&A. I haven't kept track of the
We do have a few questions,
Q&A.
Elise, and
Perfect.
we're just a little bit behind, so I'll grab just a few. So we had a question here. When we say agriculture employers, is there any breakdown on the data on the size of employers and which parts of the industry?
Which parts of the industry does that mean? I'm guessing the industry or the commodity. We definitely have that data, as well as we do have employer size as well.
Good. And the other one was for the turnover rate, what time frame is turnover rate measured in? Is this within a year or a period of time following hiring?
Yeah, good question. It's for the 2022 year. So it's like the total number of workers that left that year kind of over the total number of workers that were employed in that year in 2022.
And maybe one last one just to clarify some numbers here. Elise, you indicated that the 53% of employers said that they lost sales due to a labor shortage. However, the calculation that led to the 3.5 is using 21% of employers as a starting point. Could you please clarify the difference between 53 and 21?
Yeah, so the 53 is just specifically employers who lost sales. So it's kind of a smaller sample. You had to say that you lost, you had to say that you had a labor shortage, and then it's of employers with a labor shortage, 53% lost sales. So there's a smaller sample. When I'm saying the 21%, that's of the entire survey sample. So it's a larger sample base. 21% of total employers lost sales due to a labor shortage. I hope that helps clarify things.
Perfect. Great, thanks. All right, we can move on. And Fabian, you should be able to turn on your camera now. I think I have found the button. There we are.
Hi.
Perfect.
Good. I didn't put a shirt for nothing today. All right. Thanks. Do I have? I think I can request control, request, whoever is in charge. All right. Thanks. So, not unlike Elise, I'll start with a poll question. Just to gauge how good you are at predicting compared to how good we are, and then time will tell who was right. So how do you think that the labor gap is going to evolve over the future, say today, or like in 2030 compared to today? Do you expect it to increase by 50%, 30%, 15%, perhaps not change, or even better, decrease by 10%?
The results are still rolling in. There we go. One final call. All right, and we will close the survey and poll show.
All right, so about 61% of you expect something larger that what we're going to say. So we expect an increase by 15%. As you'll see, it's 15% from today, which is at a very high level already. And so it's already quite a substantial increase. Sadly, for the 8% that were optimistic enough to see no change or even a decrease, that's not going to be our answer. Basically, you'll see in the different reports very detailed distinctions across industries, across provinces, across occupations. But basically, what we're expecting right now is more of the same trend, and this trend, when it comes to labor gap, is going upward. So thanks for taking part in this poll. All right, so as Elise said, I'm really going to deliver what the forecast results are. There are many ways in which we can and have split the results. The goal here is to have a general interest, and then you'll be able to check, depending on if your interest is by province, industries, and so on, you'll be able to have a much more detailed picture. And so just to be clear, for those of you that did see previous versions of this work, the update was not only in terms of numbers, it was also an update in terms of methodology. The conference board developed a model called MOST, Model of Occupation, Skills and Technology, and is now our go-to forecasting tool when we want precisely to predict both the level of employment and you know, vacancy rate and labor gap. And so I'm not keeping track of questions in the chat, but if you feel one of these questions is relevant as I speak, please someone interrupt me. And so the most model really, you know, is quite simple in its sense. The conference board is producing a lot of forecasts at different scales. So it could be by provinces, it could be by industries. And among the things that the conference board projects is employment. And so, you know, you have many drivers. Population is going to matter. Different types of productivity in different industries is going to matter. And so overall, we have a fairly good forecast of what employment is going to look like. It's both informed by, you know, economic indicators, but also a lot of surveys going out to people working in industries to, you know, have a sense of what they think, where they think things are going. So, you know, a very detailed employment level prediction. On the other hand, when we want to know, you know, what the vacancy rate is going to look like for any given occupation, any given province, we rely on historical data on vacancies. Sorry, and importantly, we have a very good understanding of the skills of required by any occupation and the skills of people available for work. And therefore, when, you know, if 10 jobs open somewhere and you have 10 people unemployed, it's not enough to say, well, the matching is going to occur. You know, it's going to even out. You also need people to have the right set of skills in order to go to the job that, you know, they may want to fill. So this is a big overview of the model, but in this sense, it's really a demand and supply story. You know, you have demand for work, you have supply of workers. What matters is both the level, how many of these jobs are in demand, how many of people are even available to begin with, and then when it's the case, what are the right set of skills, and this is how we get these numbers. So what we're going to report is the peak domestic labor gap. The idea is, so why peak? I don't have to tell you that many of the activities in agriculture, seasonality matters. It means that, you know, it's not going to be the case, for instance, for beef, you know, where seasonality matters way less. But, you know, anything that has to do with harvest and so on, seasons matter. And therefore, we're going to just have a look at the snapshot of, you know, times at which it's the worst, potentially. And so the peak domestic labor gap that we're going to define is going to be the combination of unfilled job vacancies at peak plus foreign workers employed at peak. The idea is quite intuitive. You know, the labor gap is really the part of the labor that cannot be filled by Canadians. And when I say Canadians, it could be permanent resident, it could be, you know, long-term immigrants, but it shouldn't mean foreign temporary workers, which you have to hire every year and will go back. So it's really filling a need that you cannot fill domestically. Yes. Sorry. And so, yeah, just to be clear on how do we calculate peak. So our projections, usually they're annual. And the way we compute the peak is really through historical fluctuations. So we know that, you know, we know historically which month are the highest in terms of employment needs. And this is how we're going to build our peak variable. So what is the picture? And now answering your question. Well, first, here in red, you're going to have peak domestic employment. So think of it as the actual number of people employed in the field, and then, or, you know, in any job. And then in blue, you're going to have the peak domestic labor gap, which again doesn't mean that all of these jobs are going to go unfilled, since some of them are going to be filled by temporary foreign workers. But we're looking at the evolution there of the peak domestic labor gap. And so we've seen a massive increase between 2017 and what we expect for this year, what our projections are for 2023. So, having an increase of 15% compared to today means, cumulatively, it's not quite a doubling of the labor gap, but this is a massive increase compared to only a few years ago. So the labor gap is clearly, increasing quite a bit. Another thing that is interesting to note, though, is that the number of people employed in the field and in all the industries is expected to go down. So this number of people employed is expected to go down. So again, this is a little bit different from the previous project we had in 2017, and this is mainly due to the fact that we have a new model. Now, trying to split the results by province, well, so here I'm going to show you only the peak domestic labor gap by province, so not talking about the actual number of people employed, just jobs that are not filled by permanent resident or Canadians domestically. And surprisingly, in terms of levels, the levels are the highest in the provinces that are the largest and also the greatest contributor in terms of agriculture, in terms of pure numbers. It's also relatively larger for provinces that have more seasonal industries. So like if the share of seasonal industries is more important in a province, then this gap is going to be all the more larger. And this is really coming from this composition effect and the fact that when you have higher seasonality, usually you request a higher number of temporary foreign workers, and they would contribute to this domestic labor gap. And so in terms of growth, the largest growth are going to occur in Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and PEI, and that's going to be mainly driven by labor supply, or in other terms, by an aging population. So, in other words, in these regions, we expect a larger increase in domestic labor gap as a proportion, and this is mainly due to an aging population that is not replaced. Now, doing a split by industries. So greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture are going to face the largest challenge in terms of numbers of people they want to hire. That's definitely where they have the largest gap. And overall, it's really crop and seasonal industries, again, that are going to have the largest gap. Aquaculture matters as well. This is, also about the provincial issue. Yeah, so that's the idea. So, different size of industries, definitely, but a very high level of labor gap for these top industries there. Just a note that we recently added agriculture wholesale, which is the only one that is going to see a decrease in labor gap, but it's really not facing the same type of issues and challenges as any of the other pure agricultural industries. So it's almost an industry of its own that has, for instance, different occupations filling this industry. Sorry, there. oops. So taking a more dynamic approach to this, so it's interesting to see that. So I defined. Sorry, let me be clear. I defined the labor gap, and I told you, look, if you have a temporary foreign worker, this is going to be a part of the labor gap. Now, talking about vacancies, that is the job that are not filled, including by temporary foreign workers. It's quite interesting to see that this is going to remain high in spite of a rise in the projection of foreign workers being employed. So the green bars here represent foreign workers, and as you can see, there's quite a substantial increase in the number of people going directly to agriculture, temporary foreign workers joining the workforce. On top of it, though, the blue bar on top, the vacancies, so again, the jobs that are not going to be filled either by domestic or foreign workers, is not really changing. And so the split is almost 80-20%. So over time, it's a 30% increase in foreign workers in the past 5 years. And that is even stronger in growth. This is an even stronger growth in animal industries that almost tripled for poultry and dairy, the reliance on temporary foreign workers. On foreign workers, period. And so, this is expected to grow by another 20% or by 2030. Something that is important here is that our projection, so the Conference Board is also projecting foreign workers and whether they're going to join the job market and so on and join Canada. What's important to note is that this is our best projection, keeping policies constant. And if there's one thing certain in policy is that these targets, they tend to change very often. You don't even have to have a change in who's in power to have a change in policy. So this is our best guess given current policy environment. But I would say the uncertainty is the largest here because it's so easy to change the target of immigration from one year to the next. And therefore, it's also very important to remember that you have a lot of vacancies in your activity right now. This would be even higher shouldn't you have foreign workers available to you. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about the determinant of these projections. So again, all of this is based on most. And as I told you, an important component here is the actual number of people that take part of the supply of workers, and whether or not a worker is in the labor force depends on many factors. And so they're going to tell us how many people we have to work to begin with. And then once we know that, we also are going to answer the question, are you going to work in this industry rather than this one, in this occupation rather than this one? The forecast of vacancies that we have is really for the number of jobs opening and the number of people that are going to be job seekers. And so job openings come from two things: expansion. So, you're growing your business and therefore you need more and more workers, or, and these are not mutually exclusive, replacement. You have people retiring, you have someone changing jobs, you need to hire. So these are the two components for job openings. And so this is on the replacement side that things like retirement, migration in and out of provinces, mortality, attrition are going to matter. Retirement and mortality rates are estimated based on labor force participation rates by age for each occupation. Interprovincial and international immigration is incurred to CBOC forecasts. So this is something we're doing in the background constantly. For job seekers, the workers that are available, this is where skills are going to matter. So, if a job is open, how close I am as a job seeker to that job offer in terms of skills is going to determine whether I fit it immediately, but also potentially if it takes time for me to get there. In terms of numbers, whether you're a job seeker includes school leavers and immigrants. And so the number of school leavers is estimated based on three factors. The likelihood for an individual to pursue various levels of education attainment. Do you have high school? Are you higher than high school? Did you go to college? All of those things mean that when I leave school, and if I have an MA, there are a set of jobs I'm less likely to take than others. This is reflected. Second, depending on the majors that you have. So we also have information about the major that you have. And so, if you have math, pure math, you're more likely to become a prof than become, to work for Harvest or something like that. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It means you're more likely to. And finally, the likelihood to obtain various positions based on level of education and major, which we have information on by age. So what does it mean now that I explained kind of the component? What does it mean? So the first thing is when we want to compare agriculture, so all the industries we've been looking at versus all other Canadian sectors, it's quite interesting to see that, young people join the workforce and work in agriculture in, similar proportions. So the proportion of young people in agriculture is not so bad, is quite equivalent to other sectors. But actually, the number of people working in agriculture that are 55 or older is really much larger in agriculture than in the rest of the Canadian economy. Now, this is going to obviously have an impact, a large impact. So, this change in workforce demographic over the coming years means really more retirement. There's going to be more retirement as a share of the workforce than in other industries. Now, it's kind of hard to know how this is going to play out. So there's a version where this means consolidation of the number of farms. So I retire and now my neighbor is buying my farm, and you have fewer farms. So that's one thing in terms of the composition and number of farms. But what it's going to mean in terms of jobs is harder to say. In previous work of the conference board, the assumption was quite straightforward. It was saying if one farm closes, you lose a certain number of jobs. In reality, while it's likely that if you have consolidation, the number of jobs after is going to be smaller than before, it's not clear how large this impact should be. Same thing for succession. So if there is one owner that have say 2 children, if these 2 people now become co-owners, you actually doubled the number of people employed and you didn't subtract 1. So this is not easy. And so basically we try and follow previous trends and we're not making very strong assumptions about what it's going to mean, but definitely an aging population, a retiring population is going to have an impact on employment. And then, of course, it brings other challenges. So, there's a skill gap It's one thing to have workers working on the farm, but what it takes to actually be a manager of a farm could be quite different. So, there's the need to be forward-looking, and maybe mentorship or knowledge transfer is needed. That could be a solution, easing these issues. All right, now. Sorry, so I see. Yeah, so I'll take the questions at the end. These are fair questions. I'm happy to take them at the end. I'm almost there. So retirements by industry. So there is quite a lot of heterogeneity across industries when it comes to retirement, but it's interesting to see that manager positions. It's interesting to see that overall about 29% of the domestic workforce is expected to retire by 2030. That's 85,000 retirements. So that's a very massive drop in the number of people there. Managers' position, which include owner operators, are expected to see the largest number of retirements. 50% of managers in agriculture are expected to retire. So even larger share of people in management specifically are expected to retire. And to some extent it's normal. You expect managers to be older, but this is definitely a challenge. So again, the implications are not always straightforward. And so I'll take questions about this, but again, maybe it's 2 children taking on the farm, so you're solving your manager issue but maybe not the balance of workers. But remember that it's not just about the numbers, it's also having the ability to fill a job. So it's not just that you need a certain number of people, you also need the people to have the knowledge for a given position when you think position by position. And so the lowest retirement rate is in wholesale. Again, wholesale is really its own industry. It's quite different from all of these others pure agriculture industries. So looking at people actually joining the workforce, do we have info on who is expected to buy the farms? No, we do not. We do not have information on. So we understand this is a problem, and so what we observe are trends in the past, but we don't have information about whether consolidation is going to occur, or if young people are going to join and take on farms. That's really hard to tell. So young workers joining the agriculture industry is actually expected to be quite stable at around 6,000 young people a year joining the agricultural workforce. Around 2% of the domestic workforce will be school leavers each year. So that's small. And of course, these school leavers come from any and all level of education, from no education to university. Around a third of this population will enter labor position. So that's a substantial part of this workforce that goes to lower skilled jobs. Around a quarter will become specialized in livestock and farm machinery operators, and about 20% will take on managerial positions. And so finally, about immigration. So this is the historical immigration. So now we're not talking about temporary foreign workers, really people coming to settle in Canada and joining the agricultural workforce. So there has been a COVID impact where a lot of restrictions were placed on immigration. And so this definitely had an impact for long-term immigration, which was followed by a catch-up, in 2022, and quite ambitious targets in terms of immigration. So overall, we expect a growth in the ability of immigrants to join the labor force in agriculture. And so, there's definitely a huge boost there. But, sorry, in the end, it's only about 1% of the total immigration in Canada that actually joins agriculture. And so agriculture accounts for about 1.5% of employment, of immigrants. So that's about 7,000 immigrants in 2022. So, immigration in the sense of long-term immigration taking part into agriculture is really an underrepresented group thinking about, immigration policies. Oftentimes what was cited as a reason is, the rural location of agriculture. For immigrants, it may be harder to join more remote locations. And so, a potential solution there is ensuring immigrants, workers, and their family have the support to move to rural areas. This being able to do that may be a key way of attracting new immigrants there. So just to wrap up, so again, we expect a continued shortage of jobs, growing by about 15% between 2023 and 2030. The peak domestic labor gap will reach around, above 100,000 workers in 2030. Domestic employment is decreasing about 7% over the forecast period, which is, again, mainly driven by labor supply factors like retirement and not enough school leavers or immigrants joining agriculture. The largest gap will be felt by seasonal crop production industries, including greenhouse and nursery, field vegetable, tree fruit, and vine. And so agriculture will continue to need foreign workers, in animal producing industries as well as crop industries. Foreign workers will fill 78% of the peak domestic labor gap. So, and I don't have to tell you, they're a very key component to not have massive level of vacancies, or even more massive than what they are now. And so, ensuring that employers and workers have the support they need is important to make this happen. And so, the employers need to prepare for a democratic shift in their workforce. About 30% of the domestic workforce is expected to retire. This is very large. And a lot of these are going to be specifically managers and owners operators. More school leavers and immigrants and foreign workers will be part of the workforce, and therefore ensuring that they have the skills and tools to be successful. It's one thing to join agriculture, it's another thing to join in the occupations that are needed. So, this is going to be important as well. And finally, attracting more immigrants and school leavers is also key. Our forecast is really based on historical trends, and therefore the number of immigrants and school leavers is not given. We expect it to resemble the trend in the past, but things can happen and will happen. And so, there's the potential to attract more. This is, if you will, the number of, say, school leavers joining agriculture is based off of the way they're joining it now. But if things change, they may change their mind and, you know, prefer agriculture over other occupations. And so, you know, increasing awareness and education around these jobs is going to matter. Incentivizing workers to move to rural location will be key, and overall offering career opportunities can help attract workers. So I saw quite a few questions. I'm happy to take them now. I'll let Phyllis decide which I should answer.
I'm just going through here. So can you just repeat the stat for what the number of workers will be retiring from ag by 2023? Not just not managers,
By
just workers.
Sorry, so
by 2023, maybe he means 2030.
Well, yeah, I suspect 2030.
It's 20. So I don't have the statistic for not managers, but I have for total workers, it's 29% of the current domestic workforce, so the 2022 workforce, will retire between 2023 and 2030. That's over 85,000 workers. I think it's like 85,300 or something.
Yeah. Very good. There was a lot of conversation going on in the chat, so that's great. We will capture that. This is just a comment. We have here a question, maybe more generally. I think this popped up before we flipped into forecasting, but how does agriculture compare to other sectors? And what is our value proposition? For example, BuildForce, the sector council for the construction sector, said that they are short 61,000 workers at the moment. And the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum says that 75,000 people in the skilled trades are needed to be hired every year. How can agriculture win out in competition with other sectors that are increasingly competing for workers?
Yeah,
it's a great question, Deborah. That is the question, really, at the end of the day, is in this very, very competitive labor market, how do we compete? How does agriculture compete? We heard, you know, some really good ideas during, you know, focus groups and interviews about really trying to advertise like the working outdoors and the sustainability and, you know, feeding your community, feeding the world, like the value that the agriculture sector has is, you know, is fundamental. However, you know, I have no solution to this question, and it'll be an ongoing thing that the agriculture sector has to, you know, keep trying to, you know, make our value proposition and really advertise it to job seekers.
Perfect.
Yeah, if I may add something, like, so like when you're a government, you kind of want to let the market forces decide, you know, which industry is the most productive, because it usually means higher wages and so on. But agriculture is not like any other industry. Like there's not a version where we stop eating and we eat Apple iPhones instead. So like, you know, there's also help, like you're in a position of strength when it comes to requiring help from government. So it's not easy. It's not going to be one silver bullet, but like, you know, if it was any other industry, I would say do your best. But like, you know, the competition is fierce and there's nothing much you can do. But when it comes to you know, agriculture, it's key. It's like literally vital. So.
Very good. Just keeping track of time here. I don't want to keep folks beyond their slotted amount. So maybe I'll just turn it over really quickly to our Executive Director, Jen, to just provide some final words.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for that very informative presentation, Elise and Fabian. It's been great to hear all of the research and to see the changes. We're really looking forward to getting this data out in more detail to the broader stakeholder group, and certainly we'll continue to monitor the labor trends. Next slide there. Also just wanted to say that we are working on developing something that will provide more online access to the data, as well as more real-time data, so that going forward, you'll be able to access this information and to do a little bit of customization in what you're able to download from the website as well. So stay tuned for that coming in spring 2024. Thanks so much, and over to you, Phyllis.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. All right, everyone, I want to thank you for your participation. This has been extremely successful, and we are so excited to release this data out to industry. We know how important it is to you when you are approaching government and other industry stakeholders to voice with the critical shortage we are experiencing in the labor force. A few things just before we sign off. I want to thank the advisory group, our provincial panel, everyone who participated in consultation and validation groups. Your expertise and time has been absolutely invaluable to us, and we couldn't have done it without you. Additionally, I would like to thank the conference board team, as well as my team that works on LMI specifically, for all the work that you've put into this. This has been absolutely fantastic. A feedback survey will appear on your screen as we close out this webinar. If you could fill that out, that would be wonderful for us. There will be an option there to request a presentation if your industry group or commodity organization would like specific information directly for them. Please do let us know. A survey will also, if you miss it on the screen, it will also come to you via email later on this week. We will be releasing the executive summary of the national report tomorrow, and so it will be emailed out to all attendees, and you'll also be able to find it in CAHRC's document library. I did see the comment and question around when the national report will be available. We are still going through editing of the report. As you can imagine, it is very detailed and quite large, so we don't have a date set just yet, but please do stay tuned, and we are going to release it as soon as possible. That, along with the commodity and provincial reports, they will follow after the national report. So last but not least, this was recorded, so we will be sharing that. And if there's any questions or comments, do reach out to the team, and we'd be happy to get in touch. Thanks again, and have a great day.